My wife emotionally abused me. The days were long, but they blurred together. I couldn't pinpoint when it started or why it started, but I knew that something was wrong. It was like the atmosphere at home had shifted, slowly at first, imperceptibly so, and then all at once, it became something I could no longer ignore. My wife, the woman I had married, the one I thought I knew better than anyone else, had become someone different. It wasn't just one thing. It wasn't just an argument here or a disagreement there. It was a constant undermining of my sense of self. At first, it was small things, a slight comment here and there, little jabs disguised as jokes. "Oh, you're so predictable. I could never count on you for that. You're too sensitive. Just let it go." These words would linger, their sting fading just as quickly as it had come. I shrugged them off, convinced it was just stress or frustration. It happens in relationships, right? But it didn't stop. It was a drip, drip, drip that wore down my confidence, my self-worth, until I found myself questioning everything. She started to criticize my choices, my hobbies, the way I dressed, the way I spoke, even the way I walked. Everything I did seemed to irritate her. And each time, her tone was laced with a subtle venom, a quiet contempt that cut deeper than any raised voice could have. The more I tried to improve, the more she found fault. Nothing was ever good enough. There were moments when I thought I was imagining it. Maybe it was my fault. Maybe I was the one who was too sensitive, too insecure. So, I became quieter. I withdrew more into myself, trying to avoid her sharp words. I tried to be more accommodating, more patient, thinking that if I did everything right, if I could make her happy, the attacks would stop. But it never worked. She seemed to find more to criticize, and each remark, each subtle insult, seemed to wear away at me more and more. I became anxious, unsure of myself, second-guessing everything I said or did. In the quiet moments, when I was alone, I tried to reflect on what had happened. How had I become this shell of the person I used to be? How had I let her treatment of me become my new normal? I remembered the early days of our relationship, the excitement, the love, the feeling that she was my safe place, the one person who understood me. But now, her presence felt like a constant pressure, an overwhelming weight that I couldn't shake off. Sometimes, when I would finally speak up when the silence became unbearable, when her cutting remarks reached a point I couldn't ignore, I would try to explain how her words affected me. But the response was always the same: silence, dismissiveness, or worse, gaslighting. She would turn it around on me, make me feel like I was the one causing the tension, the one who was the problem. She would accuse me of being too emotional or dramatic, invalidating everything I was feeling. Slowly, I started to believe her, started to believe that it was me. Maybe I was the one who was overreacting. Maybe I was just being weak. I began to lose touch with myself. The man I had once been confident, passionate, with his own thoughts, his own ideas was slipping away, buried under layers of doubt and confusion. I found myself second-guessing everything, even the smallest decisions. Should I wear this shirt? Should I make this choice? What would she think? Would she be happy? Would she criticize me again? I lived in constant fear of doing something wrong, of angering her in some way. At times, I felt like a ghost in my own life, existing merely to satisfy her needs and expectations, never my own. The worst part was that no one knew. On the outside, everything seemed fine. We still went out with friends, still attended family gatherings, still posted pictures of our perfect life on social media. No one saw what happened behind closed doors. No one saw the way she looked at me when we were alone, with eyes that were cold, dismissive, and at times, full of disdain. No one knew the way her words cut through me like knives. No one knew how much I longed for her to look at me the way she did in the beginning, like I mattered. The isolation I felt was suffocating. It was as if I was trapped in a bubble of her making, unable to escape. I wanted to talk to someone, anyone, about what was happening, but I was terrified of being judged. What if they didn't believe me? What if they thought I was exaggerating? Or that I had somehow brought this on myself? No one ever saw the full picture. No one could understand what it felt like to have your sense of self slowly eroded over time, and then came the emotional outbursts. The moments when she would lose control over something small, something insignificant, and I would be left picking up the pieces of my shattered confidence. I would try to comfort her, to fix whatever was wrong, but she would always turn the blame on me. Why are you always so distant? You never care about how I feel. You don't even notice when I'm upset. It was always my fault. I could never do enough to make her happy, and when I tried, it only seemed to make her more irritable. I started to change in ways I didn't even recognize. I became withdrawn, avoiding conversations or moments where we might argue. I stopped sharing my thoughts, my feelings. I stopped trying to make decisions for myself, letting her take control of everything. I felt like I was losing myself, piece by piece, until one day, I looked in the mirror and didn't know who was staring back at me. The man in the reflection was a stranger, a man who had once been confident, full of life, but who now looked like he had been drained, hollowed out by the constant emotional barrage. I wondered if anyone noticed. I wondered if they could see the cracks forming, the way I was slipping away. But no one said anything. My life had become a performance, a mask I wore to pretend that everything was fine. On the outside, I was a husband, a partner. But on the inside, I was a shell of myself, suffocating under the weight of someone else's expectations. And then one night, when I could no longer pretend, when the weight of it all became too much to bear, I finally broke. I couldn't hold the tears back anymore, couldn't suppress the wave of emotions that had been building up for so long. I knew I needed help, but I didn't know how to get out. The love I had once felt for her felt distant, now tainted by the emotional manipulation, the gaslighting, and the cruelty that had become my reality. But even in that moment of devastation, I realized something important. I couldn't keep living like this. I couldn't keep sacrificing my well-being for someone else's happiness. I wasn't responsible for her emotions. I wasn't responsible for fixing her, for making her love me. And most importantly, I wasn't responsible for losing myself in the process. That night, as I sat in the quiet darkness of our home, I knew I had to take the first step toward healing. It wouldn't be easy. It wouldn't be quick. But I knew that for the first time in years, I had to put myself first. I had to take back control of my life, my voice, my worth, my peace. I couldn't let the toxic grip of emotional abuse define me anymore. And though I didn't know where the path would lead, I knew that it started with this realization: I deserved better. And I wasn't going to stay silent any longer. The days that followed were full of uncertainty and fear. The reality of what I was facing, what I had allowed myself to endure, settled heavily on my chest. I knew it wouldn't be easy to leave, to face what I had been running from for so long. The weight of my decision felt almost unbearable at times, but every part of me knew I could no longer ignore the truth. I had to make a change. I had to reclaim my life, my sense of self, even if it meant facing the most painful part of this journey, the fallout. The first few nights were the hardest. I slept in a cold, empty bed, with only the sound of my own breathing to keep me company. It was as if a heavy fog had lifted from my mind, and I was now seeing everything clearly. The years of manipulation, the subtle but powerful ways she had slowly chipped away at my identity, they all became apparent now, in a way I couldn't ignore. There were moments when I questioned myself, wondering if I had done the right thing, if I had been too hasty, but deep down, I knew it wasn't healthy. I couldn't keep sacrificing myself for a relationship that was built on control, gaslighting, and emotional abuse. The silence between us grew thicker with each passing day. The tension was palpable, as though we were both waiting for the inevitable confrontation. I had distanced myself emotionally, no longer allowing myself to be drawn into her web of manipulation. I was learning, slowly, how to protect my heart, how to set boundaries where there had once been none. And then it came, the confrontation I had been dreading. It wasn't loud or explosive, but there was a quiet devastation in her eyes when she realized that I had begun to pull away. She tried to do what she always did: make me feel guilty, make me feel responsible for her unhappiness. She told me I was selfish, that I didn't care about her, that I was abandoning her when she needed me the most. She blamed me for everything. It was the same pattern, the same cycle that had kept me trapped for so long. But this time, I didn't fold. This time, I stayed firm. I listened, but I didn't let her words sink into my soul the way they used to. I didn't apologize for my decision. I didn't allow her to twist the narrative. I calmly and clearly stated that I could no longer stay in a relationship where my worth was constantly undermined, where I felt unseen, and heard, and unloved. I told her I needed space to heal, to find myself again. Her response was exactly what I expected: tears, accusations, and the desperate attempt to pull me back in. But I stood my ground, knowing that in this moment, my responsibility was to myself. I couldn't save her. I couldn't fix what was broken in her. All I could do was save myself. In the weeks that followed, the emotional toll of my decision weighed on me. I felt guilty for leaving, even though I knew I had no other choice. The guilt came in waves. Did I abandon her? Was there something more I could have done? But each time that wave crashed over me, I reminded myself that I was not responsible for her happiness. I wasn't responsible for carrying the weight of her emotional well-being on my shoulders. I had spent so many years believing that I was, and now I was learning that I was worthy of peace, of respect, and of love. The healing process was slow, almost painfully so. There were moments when I would find myself alone, wondering if I was strong enough to continue on this path. But as time went on, I began to rediscover who I was. I began to enjoy the small moments of freedom, the silence that was no longer oppressive, but comforting. I started to find joy in things I had long since abandoned, simple things like reading books again, taking walks in the park, or spending time with friends without the constant weight of worrying hanging over me. One of the hardest things to face was the shame I had carried for so long. The shame of staying in a relationship where I was treated like I didn't matter. The shame of letting myself be emotionally abused, of allowing her to manipulate me into believing I was the problem. But as I worked through those feelings, I began to realize something important. Abuse is not the victim's fault. I had done nothing wrong by trying to love and connect with her. I had nothing to be ashamed of. It wasn't long before I sought therapy, something I should have done much earlier. Speaking with a professional allowed me to see the full extent of the damage that had been done, not just to my sense of self, but to my ability to trust myself and others. The healing process wasn't quick, and there were days when it felt like I would never be able to move forward. But with each step, each realization, I felt myself getting stronger. I learned to be kinder to myself, to stop blaming myself for things that were beyond my control. I learned to set better boundaries and to listen to my instincts. I began to trust myself again. Months later, I found myself in a place of acceptance. It didn't mean I had forgotten the pain, the heartbreak, or the damage that had been done. But I had learned to see it differently. It was part of my journey, not the end of it. I had survived. I had come out the other side stronger, more aware of who I was, and more willing to protect my peace. And as I stood in front of the mirror one evening, I saw a man who had been broken, but was now whole again. I had allowed myself to heal, and in doing so, I had found a new sense of strength. The scars were still there, but they were no longer a mark of weakness. They were a symbol of resilience, of my ability to rise from the ashes and reclaim my life. I didn't need her approval. I didn't need anyone's approval. I had learned that I was enough, just as I was. And from that moment on, I promised myself that I would never again let anyone take away my sense of worth, my identity, or my peace. As time passed, the healing continued, though not without its challenges. There were moments when I felt myself slipping, questioning whether I had made the right choice. The loneliness crept back in, the emptiness that had haunted me during the darkest parts of our relationship. But now, it was different. This loneliness wasn't tainted by manipulation or guilt. It was a quiet space for me to rediscover who I was, to learn to enjoy my own company, and to remember that I was worthy of love and respect. I began to surround myself with people who uplifted me, who saw me for who I truly was, not just as a reflection of someone else's emotional turmoil. It was in these moments of connection that I began to feel the lightness I had forgotten existed. I started to laugh again, real laughter, not the hollow chuckles I had forced when I was with her. I smiled without thinking about whether I was smiling the right way, or if it was acceptable to her standards. I began to enjoy simple pleasures, cooking a meal for myself without the constant worrying that I was doing it wrong, or watching a movie without being told what I should and shouldn't like. For the first time in years, I felt free, but there was a part of me that still struggled with the idea of intimacy. After everything I had been through, the emotional scars lingered, even if they weren't always visible. Trusting someone again seemed like an impossible task. The very thought of allowing someone else to get close, of being vulnerable again, brought up a knot of fear in my chest. I was scared of falling into the same pattern, of becoming a victim of emotional manipulation once more. I questioned whether I could ever love again, whether I could ever trust someone to treat me with the kindness and respect I deserved. But then, slowly, I started to understand that healing wasn't a linear process. It wasn't about rushing forward or forcing myself into situations I wasn't ready for. It was about taking it one step at a time, trusting that with each new day, I was getting stronger. I began to seek out therapy more regularly, working through the remnants of the trauma I had experienced. It wasn't easy to confront everything. There were days when I felt like I was taking 10 steps back. But as I continued to work through my emotions, I realized that I wasn't broken beyond repair. I was a person who had been hurt, but I was capable of rebuilding. In the months that followed, I started to rebuild my life piece by piece. I began to take more risks, small ones. At first, I accepted invitations to social events, even when my anxiety told me to stay home. I started to speak up more, voicing my opinions without fear of being criticized or belittled. I discovered new hobbies, explored new interests, and slowly started to feel more like myself again. I also began to open up to the possibility of love, though in a way that was healthier, more self-aware. I no longer looked for someone to complete me, someone who would fill the emptiness I once felt. I realized that I was already whole, that love, when it came, should be a partnership built on mutual respect and understanding, not control or dependence. And so, I didn't rush. I didn't settle for anything less than what I knew I deserved. When I did start to meet new people, I was cautious. But it was different this time. I didn't feel desperate. I wasn't looking for validation in anyone else. I was finally starting to feel secure in my own skin, and that made all the difference. The relationships I formed, whether they were friendships or potential romantic ones, were founded on honesty, mutual respect, and an understanding of my worth. I didn't have to explain myself to anyone. I didn't have to apologize for my boundaries or my past. I simply had to be myself, and if someone couldn't accept that, then they weren't meant to be a part of my life. There were still difficult moments. There were days when I found myself wondering if I would ever fully heal, if the scars from my past would always haunt me, but I had learned how to sit with those feelings without letting them control me. I had learned how to move through the pain without letting it define me. And as I did, I began to feel a quiet sense of peace, something that had been absent for so long. The hardest part was still the aftermath, the occasional reminder of what I had endured. When I would see her name pop up on my phone or hear from mutual friends who hadn't fully understood what I had gone through, there were times when I would hear her side of the story, hear how she had painted me as the villain, and it stung. But I realized something important. I didn't need to defend myself anymore. The truth was within me, and I knew who I was. I knew that I had done my best, even when it was clear I was being mistreated. I had tried, and that was enough. Over time, I learned to forgive, not because she deserved it, but because I deserved to let go of the weight she had left in my heart. Forgiveness didn't mean excusing her behavior or forgetting what had happened. It meant freeing myself from the hold that resentment and anger had over me. It meant reclaiming my power. The person I had become, someone who knew his worth, who valued himself, and who was no longer willing to tolerate mistreatment, was someone I was proud of. And as I moved forward, Step by step, I realized that I didn't need to wait for anyone to give me permission to be happy. I didn't need anyone's approval to live a life that was fulfilling and meaningful. The journey wasn't over, but I had come a long way. And though the path ahead would still have its challenges, I was no longer afraid. I had survived the darkness, and now I was learning how to step into the light. As time continued to pass, the scars from my past began to fade, but the lessons they taught me remained sharp and clear. I had rebuilt parts of myself I thought I had lost forever. With each passing day, I became more comfortable with the person I was, becoming a person who knew the importance of self-worth, of boundaries, of protecting my peace at all costs. I understood that healing was not a destination but a journey, and that some days would still be harder than others. I started to notice the subtle shifts in my mindset. I stopped apologizing for my needs, stopped shrinking myself to make others feel comfortable. I started standing taller, speaking with more confidence, not out of arrogance, but out of the deep understanding that I had every right to take up space, to take care of myself, and to prioritize my own well-being. For the first time in years, I felt truly free, and that freedom was intoxicating. It wasn't the kind of freedom that comes from escaping a toxic situation, though that was a part of it. It was the kind of freedom that came from within, from realizing that I no longer needed external validation to feel whole. And then, one day, I met someone who felt different. At first, I didn't know if I was ready for anything serious. The thought of opening myself up again felt like a mountain I might not be able to climb. But as I spent more time with them, I realized that they weren't trying to fix me or fill a void in my life. They weren't asking me to be anything other than myself. It was a relief, like stepping into the light after years of darkness. This new person didn't push me. They respected my space, my pace, and my boundaries. They didn't expect me to be perfect or to have all the answers. Instead, we shared small moments, quiet moments of laughter, long walks through the city, conversations about everything and nothing at all. They let me be me, and in doing so, they gave me the space to rediscover a part of myself I hadn't even known was missing. I didn't have to be fixed or saved. I was already whole, already worthy, and I didn't need anyone to validate that. The relationship wasn't without its challenges. There were moments when my old fears resurfaced, when I worried that I was opening myself up to someone who might hurt me again. But I had learned to trust myself, to listen to my gut, and to take things slowly. There were moments when I hesitated to let myself be vulnerable, to share the parts of my past that still stung. But I realized that vulnerability wasn't a weakness, it was a strength. It was a way of showing that I had healed, that I was not defined by my past but had grown because of it. As the months passed, I began to see the relationship for what it truly was, a partnership built on mutual respect, trust, and understanding. It was different from what I had experienced before. It wasn't about rescuing each other or trying to fill empty spaces. It was about two people coming together, already complete, to share their lives. And in that, I found a peace that I hadn't even known I was searching for. I began to understand what love really was, not the kind of love I had once thought was about sacrifice and self-doubt, but the kind of love that is built on acceptance and respect. I realized that love wasn't something you had to earn or beg for. It wasn't about someone else completing you. It was about two individuals coming together to support, uplift, and encourage each other to be the best versions of themselves. It was in these moments that I finally understood how far I had come. The person who had once been trapped in a toxic cycle of emotional abuse, self-doubt, and fear was now someone who knew their worth, who had learned to love themselves first, and who was finally ready to love in a healthy, balanced way. The journey had been long and difficult, but it had brought me to a place where I could stand tall, proud of how far I had come. The past would always be a part of me. It had shaped me, yes, but it no longer defined me. I had learned to take the lessons from it, the strength, the resilience, the understanding, and use them to build a future that was not just about surviving, but thriving. I no longer feared being alone. I no longer feared love. And, most importantly, I no longer feared myself. As I stood on the precipice of this new chapter, I realized that the healing had never been about finding someone else to make me whole. It had always been about reclaiming the power I had given away. And in doing so, I had found a strength, a peace, and a love for myself that no one could ever take away. I was ready for whatever came next, knowing that I had the power to face it, to embrace it, and to continue.